I feel like I'm learning so much because I've been that kind of person who's very, very invested in educating upcoming ladies.
Yeah.
In specifically FC26 because that's my major. But it's quite discouraging knowing very well there's no sustainability for sure for long. But with this kind of information, I feel like any kind of gamer will take it in, internalize, and then get to know, to understand what other opportunities besides being a professional gamer can be there. Like there's coaching, there's mentorship, there's a lot.
Streaming, IT, branding, marketing, merchandise, kind of like there's so many content creation. There's so many different things that are evolved around it. But something that you just touched on there, which is also really important, is careers have traditionally always been relatively short in esports. Like by the time athletes were like 25, they're almost seen as past it. That's where your balanced schedule, your healthy living comes into play, because suddenly esports athletes they're able to extend their careers longer because they're looking after themselves. Instead of kind of burning out young with a half grind and reaching 26 and they're not as, but they're able to kind of like carry on going for a bit longer. And I know I use Faker, but he's obviously the OG for everything. He's still winning world titles 10 years on his first.
Wow, amazing. I think I'm gonna follow that guy. Also, I've been having this question: how can we make esports teams in Africa more sustainable? Because I believe a lot of people are starting esports teams with no specific strategy.
Well, you've almost answered your own question there. So sustainability of a grassroots esports team is it's tricky. Okay, it is hard, but it's not impossible. And these are the conversations I've been having with CZ. These are the conversations I've been having with Control Esports in the UK. And ultimately, it comes down to business sense and business strategy. Everything that any esports organisation does needs to be considered, because there's so many different variables. If you're a small organisation and you want really good players, you haven't got the money to pay them to keep them. So recruitment is really important. You go and find really good players so that your team becomes better. If you're getting noticed by people, then you can attract sponsors. But those good players, once they get noticed, the bigger teams will take them. And there's nothing you can do. That's fine. Wish them luck. Well done. And market the fact that you are finding talent and developing it and moving it to a higher level, because that's a positive thing. You can't just spend money endlessly on things that you're not getting revenue back in return. So you've got to be very mindful of that, and you need to think about how you're going to do that. Things like, if you've got a content creation team, you don't necessarily have to pay your content creators, because there will be a wealth of young people who would just like to be part of a community, part of an esports team. And that might be sort of like you give them a shirt, you give them one of the jerseys, and they create content. And the strategy element is probably the ultimate, it's probably the most important thing, is that you need to have an overriding strategy of how are we going to firstly survive, secondly grow. They're the two kind of the fundamental things. If you can learn to survive, gives you longevity, so you can keep surviving. The longer you survive, the better you're going to get at things, the more exposure you're going to have, which is likely to hopefully bring you more sponsorship, more partnerships. Talent will find you instead of you having to find the talent. But you do need that upper layer of strategy of, we can't just survive forever, we need to grow. And when I sponsor a team, one of the things that I always look at is, what are your expenses for the year? How much does it cost you to run this organisation? And then, because most dogs come in and ask for a silly amount of money, and they'll say, oh yeah, we want $50,000. Yeah, you're not getting $50,000. So I haven't got $50,000. And if I did, you wouldn't be getting it. I want to look at your finance. I want to see how much your financials look like, so that I can work out, for starters, whether or not it's worth carrying on. Whether you're doing quite well, or whether or not you're heading for a disaster. And then that's when I'll make my decision about how much money I might want to sponsor or might not want to sponsor. But that comes with mentorship and business advice, You know, that's part of being the sponsor, is to help these orgs become more sustainable, to give them advice. And sometimes that advice is, you know, they don't like hearing it.
Yeah.
But it's not me criticising, it's me trying to be constructive
Yeah.
to make them sustainable so that I can carry on working with them.